In 1991, a man sold $123 million of KFC and renamed his entire company after a chain of steakhouses. Within 5 years, it went bankrupt. The secret recipe behind the cheese toast? 2 ingredients. This is what happened to Sizzler. But the bet did not start with Collins. It started with a salesman in California who read a newspaper article and decided he could undercut it by a dime, because apparently a dime was all it took to launch a billion-dollar steakhouse. In 1957, a California salesman named Del Johnson came across a story in the Wall Street Journal about a steakhouse in San Francisco called Tad's. The place was selling a full steak dinner, a big steak with a baked potato and a salad for $1.09. Johnson looked at that price and basically said, "I can beat it." On January 27, 1958, he and his wife Helen opened Del's Sizzler Family Steakhouse in a strip mall parking lot in Culver City, California. They had $50 in the cash register. The menu was about as simple as a menu can get. 2 kinds of steak, a baked potato, and a green salad with 1 lonely cherry tomato on top. All of it for 99 cents. The name came from the plate. Every steak went out on a hot metal plate set inside a little wood platter, and the metal was so hot that the steak was still sizzling when it hit your table. You could hear your dinner coming across the dining room before you could see it. That sound was the whole experience. And it became the name. The concept caught on fast. Within 4 years, there were more than 100 Sizzler locations across California, almost all of them franchised. Johnson figured out early that franchising was the way to grow without putting up all the money yourself. By 1967, 164 restaurants. That is when a man named Jim Collins showed up. And this is where a steakhouse story turns into something bigger. Collins ran a place called Hamburger Handout, literally next door to the original Culver City Sizzler. He had opened it back in 1952. The man watched Del Johnson's parking lot fill up every single night for years and finally decided, fine, if you can't beat him, just buy the whole thing. Collins wrote a check for about $1 million, took the company public as Collins Foods International, and started building. Now here is the part that matters for the rest of this story. Collins Foods was not just a Sizzler company. Jim Collins had been building a KFC empire on the side. At one point, his company operated 209 KFC restaurants across the United States and ran the entire KFC franchise operation in Australia. Fried chicken, coast to coast, plus a whole second empire on another continent. That is not a side project. That is a fortune. Keep that in the back of your mind, because in a few years he is going to walk away from every single one of them. Under Collins, Sizzler grew into a real restaurant. The bare-bones counter-service steak stand turned into a proper sit-down chain. By 1972, 200 restaurants across 23 states. By the early 80s, more than 400 locations stretching from California to Guam to Kuwait. Somewhere in the late 70s, Sizzler added the salad bar. A salad bar does not sound like much today. But in the late 70s and early 80s, a big loaded salad bar was an event. Sizzler's version was not some afterthought in the corner, it was a full production. Soups, pasta salads, a make-your-own taco station, chilled shrimp. And that self-serve, soft-serve ice cream machine with the sprinkles that every kid in America made a beeline for the second their parents looked away. Then there was the cheese toast. Big slices of white bread, golden on top, this sharp, bubbly cheese spread that people absolutely could not get enough of. Sizzler had been serving it since 1968. When it first showed up at a restaurant in Hollywood, California, it was free with your meal in Australia. 99 cents if you ordered it on the side in the States. Some people came for the steak and left talking about the cheese toast. Some people came exclusively for the cheese toast and the soft serve and called it a balanced meal. We all know who you are. But here is something nobody paid much attention to at the time. The salad bar and the cheese toast were already becoming more popular than the actual steaks. People were walking into a steakhouse and spending most of their time at the salad bar. The steak, The thing that gave this chain its name was quietly becoming an afterthought on the plate. The restaurants were packed, the money was good, so nobody flagged it as a problem. But the pattern was already there, years before anybody turned it into a catastrophe. If you are over 50 right now, I probably do not need to describe any of this to you, because you were there. Friday nights in that Sizzler parking lot, packed before the sun went down. Families lined up along the wall of the waiting area, kids eyeing the salad bar through the glass partition. Your dad going back for a second plate from the buffet. Your mom telling you to eat something besides cheese toast. That one trip to the soft serve machine where you put way too many sprinkles on top and nobody stopped you. It was not fancy. Nobody in the history of the English language has ever called Sizzler fancy. But it was yours. Your family went there. Your neighbors went there. And if you brought it up at school on Monday, 3 other kids knew exactly what you were talking about. A young Jodie Sweetin, a couple of years before she landed on the show Full House, appeared in a Sizzler television commercial back in 1987. She came back for a 65th anniversary spot decades later. That is the kind of American institution this chain was. You did not think about Sizzler the way you thought about a fancy restaurant. You just went. It was always there, like the post office. By 1992, the chain reached the absolute top. 786 restaurants across 11 countries, over $1.12 billion in system-wide sales. Best year the company ever had. There were Sizzler restaurants all over the United States, all over Australia and Japan, across Southeast Asia, and in the Middle East. A kid walking through the salad bar in Brisbane, Australia ate the same cheese toast as a kid in Phoenix, Arizona. If you want to know what Sizzler felt like at the very top, look up the Sizzler promotional video from around 1991. It is still floating around the internet, and it is the most 90s thing you will ever see in your life. Families in bright colors, saxophone on the soundtrack, the narrator talking about Sizzler like it is a national monument. It is so sincere it almost hurts to watch now. Nobody was being ironic. That is just what America sounded like when it talked about a steakhouse. And the wildest part is, at the time, it made perfect sense. That is when Collins made the bet. He sold all 209 American KFC restaurants to PepsiCo for $123 million. Then he did something that tells you everything about how serious he was. He took his own name off the company. Collins Foods International became Sizzler International. The business he had built from a hamburger stand called Hamburger Handout in 1952, 40 years of work with his name on the door, and he erased it. Put the Steakhouse's name up instead. KFC was gone. Every restaurant, every franchise agreement, every dollar of guaranteed fried chicken income, all traded for one thing: this chain. That is not a hedge. That is a man burning the boats. For exactly 1 year, it looked like the smartest bet in the history of the restaurant business. Quick thing before we keep going. If this trip is bringing back some memories, a subscribe really does help us keep digging these names up. That is it. Back to it, because this is where it falls apart. Right around the same time Collins was going all in on Sizzler, somebody inside the company decided that a steakhouse was not enough anymore. Sizzler leaned hard into the buffet. Not just the salad bar, which had always been there. A full buffet court inside every restaurant. All you can eat everything. Fried shrimp, pasta, chicken wings, soup, desserts, the works. And it made sense on paper. Buffets were everywhere in early 90s America. Golden Corral restaurants, Old Country Buffet, Hometown Buffet locations were all packing customers in. Sizzler already had the salad bar set up, so why not just go bigger? Here is why the buffet court became a problem. When the buffet was a side feature, people still ordered steaks off the menu. The steak was the main event, the salad bar was the warm-up act. But once the buffet became the whole show, customers figured out fast that they could fill up at the buffet and skip the steak entirely. Why spend $12 on a sirloin when you can eat all the fried shrimp you want for $8? That is not a hard decision. People did the math on that in about 2 seconds. The steaks were where the money was. A steak on the Sizzler menu has a solid profit margin. You charge a good price for a cut of beef that costs you a fraction of that. A buffet has a terrible margin. Trays of food out all day, half of it gets wasted. And you charge one flat price while customers pile their plates as high as they physically can. The more they eat, the less you make. So Sizzler fell into a trap it built with its own hands. The buffet court brought bodies through the door, but those bodies were eating the cheap food from the buffet line and skipping the expensive steaks from the menu. And to keep the buffet court from completely sinking the operation, Sizzler management started cutting quality on everything else. Cheaper ingredients on the menu items, smaller steak portions, food sitting out on the buffet bar longer than it should have. You do not cut the steak quality at a steakhouse and get away with it. The regulars, the people who came in every Friday night, they could taste the difference. The dining rooms started feeling tired, the Sizzler buffet trays looked a little less fresh than they used to, and the families who had treated Sizzler like their restaurant, the ones who went every single week, they started going every other week. Then, once a month. Then, not at all. The money told the story. Revenue at Sizzler dropped from $504 million in 1993 to $436 million by 1995. Almost $70 million gone in 2 years. And remember, this is a company that just sold all its KFC stores. There is no safety net under this trapeze. Right when the Sizzler chain was hollowing itself out from the inside, something showed up from the outside. Outback Steakhouse restaurants. Outback opened its first location in Tampa, Florida in 1988, and by the mid-90s, Outback was everywhere across the country. There was no buffet at Outback and no salad bar. Just a good steak brought to your table by a server who actually introduced themselves by name. The Bloomin' Onion appetizer, the Australian Outback theming on the walls. Longhorn Steakhouse and Texas Roadhouse were not far behind Outback either. A whole new generation of sit-down steakhouses rolling out across America, every single one built on the same simple idea. Focus on the steak, make it good, bring it to the table. The exact thing Sizzler used to do before it buried the steaks under a buffet court. The people who used to eat at Sizzler, they were standing in those Outback and Longhorn lines now, wondering when exactly Sizzler had stopped feeling like it was worth the trip. Then came the part that nobody at Sizzler headquarters could have planned for. In the summer of 2000, 64 people got sick from contaminated food at 2 Sizzler restaurants in the Milwaukee area. The source was tainted beef that had been shipped in from an outside supplier. Over 150 people were hospitalized or fell ill. A 3-year-old girl named Brianna Creefall died on July 28th after eating food that had been cross-contaminated near a meat grinding station inside one of the Milwaukee restaurants. There are no jokes in that paragraph. A family went to a Sizzler for dinner and their daughter did not come home. Here is a detail that almost never gets discussed. 7 years before Milwaukee, in 1993, 4 Sizzler restaurants in Oregon and Washington state had their own food contamination outbreak. 39 confirmed cases. Same beef supplier. Same problem with in-house meat grinding equipment. Nothing changed enough to stop it from happening again. The salad bar concept, the buffet setup, the whole self-serve model that Sizzler had bet the whole company on, all of it came under a very different kind of scrutiny after the Milwaukee tragedy. People looked at those trays of food sitting out under the heat lamps inside a Sizzler restaurant and thought about it differently now. Collins's company, the one he had renamed Sizzler International, had already filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on June 3, 1996. 116 company-owned Sizzler restaurants closed across the country. 4,600 jobs disappeared. 5 years. That is the gap between selling every KFC franchise to PepsiCo and filing for bankruptcy at Sizzler International. Sizzler emerged in 1997 and spent the next few years trying to stabilize. Fewer restaurants, smaller footprint, a quieter version of what it used to be. Then the Milwaukee tragedy landed in the news and in the courtrooms, and there was no outrunning it. Ownership of the Sizzler chain changed hands twice in 6 years. New investors, new management, same problem. Each new owner tried a new identity inside the Sizzler dining rooms. American Grill rebranding one year, a whole new menu the next, brighter paint on the walls, different price points on the boards. Nothing stuck. Their own chief growth officer later admitted that the effort to change what Sizzler was, and I am quoting him here, just never worked. A steakhouse that stopped being a steakhouse. And by the time somebody finally said, hey, maybe we should just go back to cooking a good steak, nobody was waiting for them anymore. Here is the strange part of the Sizzler story, though. The bet failed, but the chain did not die. Sizzler was not the only family steakhouse in trouble. The whole category of budget steakhouses with salad bars went down around the same time. Ponderosa steakhouses and Bonanza steakhouses peaked at around 700 locations combined across the country. Today, about 15 remain. York Steakhouse restaurants had nearly 200 locations at the peak. One is still open in Columbus, Ohio, the budget family steakhouse with the big salad bar and the low prices. For about 20 years, it was one of the most reliable categories in American dining. And now it is basically a ghost. Sizzler is down to 74 restaurants. Most of them are in California, still serving steaks, still running the salad bar, still making that cheese toast. The chain filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy a second time in September of 2020 during the worst of the pandemic. That filing only covered the 14 company-owned Sizzler stores. The 90-plus franchised restaurants kept their doors open. Sizzler emerged in January of 2023, and this time the company is trying something it probably should have tried 20 years ago. They are going back to the steak. Updated Sizzler dining rooms. Brighter interiors. A menu that leans into what actually made the place work back in 1958. The steaks. The salad bar. The cheese toast. It was not a buffet court or an American Grill or whatever the last rebranding attempt was. Just Sizzler. Being Sizzler. And according to the company's chief growth officer, the remodeled locations are seeing sales jump 47%. One remodeled Sizzler saw sales double. Turns out people wanted Sizzler the whole time. They just wanted the real one. But here is the part of the Sizzler story that catches most Americans completely off guard. Sizzler is alive and well in Thailand. 63 Sizzler restaurants in Bangkok and across the country, run by a hospitality conglomerate called Minor International, which purchased the Asian franchise rights in 2023. In a Bangkok shopping mall tonight, a Sizzler restaurant is a perfectly normal place to sit down for a Tuesday dinner. People who have never heard a single word about Culver City, California, or Del Johnson or Jim Collins's $100 million gamble are eating steaks and cheese toast on the other side of the planet. Japan still has a handful of Sizzler locations too, run through a company called Royal Holdings. The chain that Collins bet his whole career on is serving dinner right now in countries he probably never imagined it would reach. But the part of this story that really gets people is Australia. And this is where the recipe comes back around. Sizzler landed in Australia in 1985. Collins Foods opened the first Australian Sizzler in a suburb just outside Brisbane, and Australians did not just like it. They loved it. At the Australian peak, 74 Sizzler locations across the entire country. And the cheese toast became a genuine cultural institution there. Sizzler Australia said they served over 225 million slices of cheese toast across 35 years of operation. Then on November 15th, 2020, all 9 remaining Sizzler restaurants in Australia closed their doors for good. Some of those Australian Sizzler locations had lines around the building on closing day. Families who had been eating there for 20 and 30 years showed up one final time. Parents brought their kids the same way their own parents had once brought them through those Sizzler doors as children. Social media was full of photos of final cheese toast slices, tagged friends, stories about birthday parties and first dates, and Sunday family dinners that ran for decades at the same Sizzler table. For Australians of a certain age, losing their local Sizzler felt less like a restaurant closing and more like losing a whole piece of their childhood. The kind of place you never thought about until it was gone, and then you could not stop thinking about it. As the Australian Sizzler restaurants were closing their doors for the last time, the company finally released the cheese toast recipe. 2 ingredients: margarine and pecorino cheese, mixed together into a paste spread on thick white bread. That is it. That is the whole thing. The recipe that the entire internet spent 30 years trying to reverse engineer, the one home cooks tried with 8 different cheeses and a blowtorch and a prayer, was 2 ingredients the whole time. Just sitting there on your plate for 3 decades. But even that is not quite the end of the Sizzler story, because it is coming back to Australia. Miner International is planning to open a Sizzler restaurant inside a new hotel at Sydney Airport, scheduled for 2027. After 7 years with no Sizzler anywhere in Australia, the name is going to light back up. Del Johnson died in 1992. The same year, his little 99-cent steak stand hit its all-time peak at 786 restaurants. He never saw the bankruptcy, the food poisoning outbreaks, the closures, any of it. Helen Johnson passed in 2007. Jim Collins, the man who traded $123 million of KFC for a chain of steakhouses, lived long enough to see the chain file for bankruptcy and to see the name survive anyway. What people miss is not really the restaurant. It is the Friday night when your family piled into the car and went out together. The birthday where you got to pick the restaurant and you picked Sizzler every time. The sound of a steak on a hot metal plate coming across the dining room while the whole place smelled like toasted cheese. The bet was wild. Nobody would argue that. But 68 years after a salesman with $50 in the register put a steak on a hot plate inside a Culver City strip mall and gave it a name, that name is still on signs from California to Bangkok. The cheese toast is still going out. Just 2 ingredients. That is all it ever was. So tell me, which Sizzler was yours? What town? What year did you hit the cheese toast first, or the salad bar? And be honest with me, did you actually order a steak, or did you just demolish that buffet line and call it dinner? Drop it in the comments. I want the whole section full of these, because somebody down there remembers the exact same Sizzler you do. If you were there, you already know. Thanks for taking the trip back with me. Tap subscribe, and I will see you next week when we dig up another name you have not thought about in 20 years.